Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and we'll continue with 100 days of DevOps. We are currently exploring cloud and Microsoft Azure. Yesterday we created our Microsoft Azure account and I hope that by now a lot of people would have been able to create their accounts. We did it in two ways. We created the free account and I showed you the process out of how to create a free account as well as how to create a pay-as-you-go account. So the account I'm currently using is a pay-as-you-go because, like I explained yesterday, the debit card associated with that I used has already been used previously in another account to get the free voucher. So today we are going to, look into some more things when it comes to Microsoft Azure, and I believe that there are basic things that you need to know. I think this that it's the foundation of everything. And what are the things we are going to look at today? We're going to look at a resource groups, and resource manager. These are three things that you need to know as a cloud engineer that is working with Azure, Microsoft Azure. So without wasting much time, what is a resource? When I come to our portal, now this is, let's say for example, and I want to create a virtual machine. We can see it up here. There are different ways for you to get there. You can see it, virtual machine here. You can click on the more service. You can bring the drop down here and look for it, and as well as you can search. So there are different ways for you to search for what you want. When I click on virtual machine, this is a service. Like I said, Azure has over 200 services that you can actually um work with, right? So now this is a service. The virtual machine, will I call it? Yeah, this what we are currently seeing now is a service, right? But what is a resource? When I create a virtual machine from here, when I create a virtual machine, an instance of a service is what we call a resource. So a resource is basically an instance of a service. They have the virtual machine service, right? And when you now try to create a virtual machine from that service, that is what we call a resource. So basically, you're going to be hearing more of resource, you'll be hearing resource group. So in simple definition, let me write this. In simple definition, a resource is an instance of a service. So until you create an instance from that particular service, all you have is a service. All you have is a service until you create an instance. I have not created an instance, a virtual machine instance. So what we currently have is just the virtual machine service. So when I create an instance of from this service, that is what we call a resource. And how do you create a virtual machine? So um basically it gives you like a drop down and then you have to fill in all of these things. So on my right hand of everything I do, it shows me the estimated cost and all of that, and that's the beauty of Microsoft Azure. You can see your estimated cost even before you click on the create. But before we go ahead and create a virtual machine, there's another thing that I want to introduce us to. Now you can see there's a subscription and then there's resource group. Now, what is a subscription? Basically, a subscription is um how do I put it now? It contains your billings. It is where Azure bills you from. It is where Azure charges from. Now, your free account, basically you can call it a free subscription because now you're not being charged. You're only being charged from the 200 free credits that you were given. So you'll be given a free subscription. However, for me, I'm using a pay-as-you-go account. So I'm having a pay-as-you-go subscription. Now, can you have more than one subscription? Of course, you can have that. You can have more than one subscription. If I go to, let me set subscription. So when I click on subscriptions, when I come here, you can see that I have one subscription, which is the one I am currently using, right? I'm currently using it. And you can see that there's add. So I can add another subscription, maybe the way they do it in a production setting is that different arms or different parts of the organization have different team. The finance team might have their own subscription. The human resource team might have their own subscription. So basically, these are done to manage billings. It is for auditing sake, to track billings, to manage billings, so to know which area or which arm of your company is consuming more and how to manage that. And that is why one thing I mentioned on the first day is, as a cloud engineer, as a DevOps engineer working with the cloud, you need to one of the things that you need to be good at is effective cost management. And you need to make sure that you have set everything up to be able to manage and to be able to monitor the cost effectively. Now, when we talk about managing and tracking costs, one of the things that, apart from your subscription, another thing that can help you do that is what we actually want to look at, which is a resource group. Oh, I think I already went back too much. I already went back too much. Sorry, my bad. Okay, so we are back. Now, I hope you understand what a resource is. For example, this Kubernetes service, it is a service. But the moment you create an AKS cluster from it, then it is called a resource. Now we understand all of these are services. What you can see as services. But once you create an instance from that service, it is called a resource. I'm going to show you um, the process of which a resource is created in a bit. But before then, we're trying to create a virtual machine, and I was trying to show us something. I was trying to show something, just a sec. Okay, my network. Okay. So now I talked about subscription. Basically, subscription helps you um track your billing, tracks your spending, and all of that. Another thing that is very, very important is a resource group. Now, every resource in Azure has to be in a resource group. You cannot create a resource in Azure without creating a resource group. And what is the resource group? And why do we need a resource group? Basically, a resource group is like a container that houses your resource that probably does the same thing or solves the same issue. For example, let's say we want to create a virtual machine with its database and all of that. So instead of creating, I mean, get this. So instead of creating a virtual machine in one resource group and then creating something else, okay. So instead of creating, let's say this is resource group one, this is resource group two. And instead of creating a virtual machine in this particular resource group, and then coming to create your database in this particular resource group, since they are all having the same, they're all trying to meet the same goal, you can put all of them in one resource group. And there are some benefits in having all your resources that work together to achieve one thing. The best thing is to put them in a resource group because there's a way resource group has been designed, in terms of communication and all of that. You don't have to like set up some other extra things. With time, we'll be able to see more of the benefits. And another benefit of a resource group is that it helps in tracking. Yes, so you are able to monitor what is spent. You can create policies around the resource group. You can monitor it and you can create logs and there are so many things a resource group does. But in on a basic level, a resource group is like a logical container that contains your resources. So a resource is an instance of a service. Every resource has to be in a resource group. And resource group has a one-to-one connection or one-to-one relationship in the sense that you cannot have a resource in more than one resource group. You cannot have a resource in more than one resource group. You have one resource in one resource group. That is the way it works. A resource group and a resource have one-to-one relationship. So coming back to coming back to our virtual machine. Now, we can't create this virtual machine without creating a resource group first. You understand? So I can easily just create new. Azure makes it easier for us to create new. But I want to show us how you would create a resource group if you want to. If I click the drop down here, you can see that there are no available resource groups. So I'll go back to the home and I'll click on resource groups. This is resource groups here. So you can see it here, description. Resource groups provide a logical container to manage and organize Azure resources, simplify administration, and enable efficient resource management. So basically, that is what a resource group helps us to actually do. So we don't have a resource group. We click on create. You click on create, and it's very, very easy. Under 30 seconds, your resource group should be created. So let's say we're going to name the resource group. We'll choose our subscription. Obviously, I have just one subscription. Um, I'll test test resource group. You can we'll name it test resource group, and we are going to choose. For me, I'll choose West Europe. Is there a West Europe here? Yes, I can see it already. West Europe. Now, I'm choosing West Europe because I'm choosing the data center that is closest to me. In the first time we talked about Azure, I talked about Azure having different regions, different availability zones, and all of that in different parts of the country. And I said reason why that happens is because of latency. You want to actually choose a data center that is like closer to where you are located than choosing the one that is far. If I go and choose, if I choose Brazil, now Brazil is far. Before data will travel from here to the data centers in Brazil, it takes time. So I want somewhere closer to me. So depending on your location, you will choose where is actually closest to you. And from my research and from what I've been using since I've been using Azure, I have been using West Europe. Yes, so West Europe is my preference. I don't use US East or US um West. Those are the most popular. For me, I'm going to use West Europe. If you're seeing my video from and you're currently in Nigeria, you can also try to use West Europe or whichever location you prefer. So basically, what just have that out of your mind that whatever region you are choosing, that is where your information is being stored. And before you do anything, you have to consider two things. You consider latency between where you are and where you're storing data. Another thing you need to consider is I can choose this. I'm choosing this because it is closer to me, and I don't have any product that is serving my customers. But in a case where you have a product and it's serving your customers, and your customers is in US, you don't want to choose where it's closest to you. You will choose where it's closest to your customers. So definitely you'll be using things like US East, US Central, US West. So that's the difference. There are two ways to go about choosing your region. If you're just doing for testing purpose, you can choose the region closest to you. But if you are doing for a production purpose, you choose the region closest to your target market. If your target market is in Europe, then you want to choose a data center in Europe. If your target market is in India, is in China, you want to choose a data center that is closest to where your market is. Basically, this is for latency sake. So I hope that has been clear, and I hope that you've been able to get that. So basically, you can click next if you want to put tags, that's fine. But I can just review and create. So Azure will check everything and be sure that what you created is correct and you create. So if as I click the create button, Azure is going to create my resource group for me. So and that takes about 30 seconds or thereabout. So you can see from here my notification bar resource group created. So when I refresh this, And let me refresh. Okay, so now I have a test resource group. Subscription is my subscription. Location is West Europe. That is how easy it is to create a resource group. And if I go into the resource group, you can see that the resource group is empty. So there are no resources to actually match. There are no resources that have been placed into the resource group. So I'm going to go back. Now we can create our virtual machine. So we create, let's click on create. And so now we've been able to understand what the resource is. Then we'll be able to understand what a resource group is. We've created a resource group. And now we're going to create a virtual machine resource, a virtual machine instance from the virtual machine service. I told you a resource is an instance of a service. So when I click on the drop down, I can see my resource group that we created. So you click on that, I can choose test VM. I'm naming it test VM. And since I've started with West Europe, obviously Azure will want to give me West Europe by default. So now another thing we need to consider is I'm going to you know do all of this very well. I just want to quickly create a virtual machine so that we can see the virtual machine resource. So I'm just going to do this. Okay. Um, let me choose Windows. You don't actually have to understand what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just trying to create a virtual machine resource. When we look into virtual machines very well, then I will be able to explain all of this. So let me just review and create. So Azure is giving me estimated bill per month. You can see it's 69.79 dollars per month. So you already know what you want to use, right? So you already know exactly what you are going to spend at the end of the month. I think network is a bit slow. So it's running final validation, as you can see up here, running final validation. So it will validate that all my settings are actually, correct. And then once that has been completed, I'll go ahead and create the virtual machine, resource, and then we'll see it inside the virtual machine, inside the resource group that we have actually created. And apart from the virtual machine, you'll see some other things that will be created with it. So let's give it a sec for it to finish running the validation. Okay, so it's showing validation pass. I had to make some changes because there was an issue with the virtual machine I chose, and I had to just for this purpose, for the purpose of this video, I had to change my region to East US. So, but because we are not really trying to create a virtual machine that we will use, I just wanted to show us the process of creating a resource inside the resource group. So I'm just going to choose that. Our estimated budget is $102. Obviously, we are not going to use that. And once we are done, what we want to do, I will delete the virtual machine. So validation has been passed. Everything has been checked to be successful. And the next thing I want to do is to create the resource. So it will start creating the resource immediately. And along with the virtual machine, it's going to create, some other things like your networking, your disk, and all of that. So we're going to hold on for it to create all of this. So it's already initializing deployment as we can see on the top right hand corner of my screen. So it's initializing deployment and it will start creating the resource one after the other. So you can see now that things are being created and is to create not just like I said, it won't just create the virtual machine, it creates some other things in attachment to that. So I'm going to pause the video now for this deployment to be complete. And once that is done, we would resume, we'll resume the continuation of this video. And so deployment has been successfully created and we have our resources. Let's see what was created. Our virtual machine was created. Our network interface was created. Public IP address was created. Network security group were all created. So in addition to just the VM, you don't get only the VM. You get other things associated with the VM to make the VM work effectively. So we can go to resource, but that is not what we want to actually do here. I want to go to the resource group, not the resource. So we'll go back, then we click on resource groups. Then we have our this resource group. Now notice that a new resource group was created. Basically, this is what um it will be created automatically because we created our virtual machine. So it's a feature of Azure called Network Watcher. So it watches it's like one of the monitoring tools that watches your virtual networks, anything that has to do with networking, it watches it and takes record to it. When we look at Azure monitors and all that, we would be able to make reference to this. So you can see that it was created in the East US, and that's because our virtual machine was created in the East US. So when we go into the test resource group, now, please note that for the fact that my test resource group was created in the West Europe doesn't mean that everything that should be in the resource group should be West Europe. You understand? You can have, it's just a resource group, it's a virtual container, right? You can have resources in the resource group that are not in West Europe. Though personally, I like to, maintain one country or one region, but there will be some situations where you might have to, have things from different regions in the same resource group. So now you can see that the virtual machine is there, the public IP is there, the security group, and all of that is created in the resource. This is the resource group. This is the resource group, and you can set policies. You come here, you can, configure who has access to the resources in your resource group, and all of that. So I've been able to show you how to create a resource group, and then we've been able to demonstrate a resource. Have we've been able to demonstrate creating a resource group, a resource, putting it in the resource group, and how to view that resource group. So the last thing I will talk about is now we've created this virtual machine. I'm going to show you how the virtual machine was created because you might just be thinking, I just clicked on something and then how did it come about? How do all these things come about? So I'm going to give you a quick illustration of how this happens. And let me take this off. Let me take this off. Now, when a resource is created, when a resource group is created, whatever resource you want to create in in Azure, it is done by something which is called a resource manager, right? So what did we create now? Let me go. We created a virtual machine. So what happens is that you create the virtual machine. Once you create it, you use the portal we use the portal to create it. There are other means in which you can use to create a virtual machine. You can use alongside the portal, you can use the CLI, there's Azure CLI. You can even use API calls to create a resource. So either of these means, you can either use the portal, the CLI, API, and there are others like that. But we use the portal. So when we clicked on create, what happened? Azure sends a message to the Azure Resource Manager, Azure Resource Resource Manager in brackets ARM. So if you hear things like ARM, it's not a big word. It's just a short form of Azure Resource Manager. Now, this Azure Resource Manager is the one responsible for creating anything you want to create on Azure. So what it does is that once the request is made to this resource manager, since you've already said, okay, we're creating a VM in the East US, so it goes to the East US, picks a and an availability zone or a data center in the East US, gets a server, creates the virtual machine, and then sends it back to you. So that is what happens when all those processes go on, where you see it is deploying and then you're waiting for things to be created. Everything is done by the Azure Resource Manager. So what have we learned today? We've learned what a resource is, which is an instance of a service. We've learned that we've learned what a resource group is, which is a logical container that contains resources. We've learned that a resource and a resource group have one-to-one relationship in the sense that a resource cannot one resource can only belong to one resource group. You cannot have one resource in more than one resource group. And we've also learned that the resource manager is responsible for creating everything that you can see in Azure. We've also gone through the step of creating a resource group. We've created a resource group. For the resource we created, for the virtual machine we created, you can just, ignore that. I wanted to just create a quick resource. When we start looking into all of these things one by one, then I will now show you properly how we create a virtual machine, how we choose the type of operating system, and all of that. And then we've also looked at a resource manager, which is um that tool that creates all of the resource in Azure. Then we also looked at subscriptions. I touched a bit on subscription, which helps you manage your billings and all of that. I believe that you must have learned one or two things today. And if you've been enjoying my videos so far, please do well to like the video, share it with anybody that might be interested in learning DevOps, and please do well to subscribe to my channel. And most importantly, turn on your notification bell so that when I post new videos, you get them immediately. So we are going to continue in that progression tomorrow. I'll see you again tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.